Hey there, and welcome. I'm glad you pressed play today, because what we're about to explore could change the way you look at something that most people spend their lives running from: fear. For most of us, fear is the enemy. It's the dark cloud on the horizon, the monster under the bed, the thing we avoid at all costs. But in a healthy state of panic, follow your fears to build wealth, crush your career, and win at life. Author and financial expert Farnoosh Torabi turns that idea on its head. She invites us to ask a radical question. What if fear isn't something to run from, but something to listen to? What if fear, instead of being a villain, could be one of our greatest teachers? If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to BookSnap, and comment below the title of the book you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. Now, let's step into the beginning of Farnoosh's journey. She grew up in a household marked by uncertainty. Her parents were immigrants, having left behind the familiar streets and traditions of Iran to build a new life in America. The family arrived with very little, and like many immigrants, they carried both the weight of loss and the hope of possibility. For a child, though, the atmosphere of scarcity and insecurity was overwhelming. Farnoosh remembers the constant undertone of fear in her home: fear of not having enough money, fear of not fitting in, fear of losing what little they had managed to gain. Imagine being 8 years old and already aware that your family's financial footing is fragile, that every choice matters, that any misstep could set you back. For many children, fear becomes a cage, a reason to shrink, to avoid risk, to cling tightly to what little feels safe. But for Farnoosh, those early experiences planted a different seed. Fear became a kind of warning system, a signal that something important was at stake, and that she had to pay attention. It didn't happen overnight. Like anyone else, she stumbled. She recalls the sting of moments when fear got the best of her, when she stayed silent instead of speaking up, when she chose the safer option and felt the weight of regret. Those early years taught her that fear can be both paralyzing and clarifying. It can be a chain, but it can also be a compass. As she grew older, she began to see a pattern. Fear showed up most fiercely when the stakes were highest: before a big test, before a job interview, before making a choice that could shift her future. And she began to ask herself, maybe this isn't a signal to stop. Maybe it's an invitation to step forward. The very title of her book, A Healthy State of Panic, is a paradox that captures this idea. Panic, in most contexts, is destructive. But what if the adrenaline, the quickened heartbeat, the racing thoughts, all the things we label as panic, are really our body's way of telling us we're standing at the threshold of growth? What if instead of silencing fear, we learn to interrogate it? This is the doorway Farnoosh invites us through at the start of her story. She wants us to think of fear not as a roadblock, but as a flashing sign that says, pay attention. Something meaningful is about to happen. And as we'll see, her entire philosophy is built around different kinds of fears: fear of rejection, of money, of loneliness, of failure, of uncertainty, of exposure, even of success, and how each one can hold a lesson if we're willing to listen. To understand her perspective, picture fear as a traveling companion. Not always welcome, not always comfortable, but always present. Sometimes this companion whispers in our ear when we're about to take a leap. Sometimes it shouts when we drift too far from what matters. And sometimes it simply stands in the corner, reminding us that our time is finite and precious. The truth, she says, is that fear isn't going anywhere. It has followed her since childhood, through the halls of school, into her early career as a financial journalist, and later into the messy middle of adulthood, where ambition collides with family, money, and identity. Rather than wishing fear away, she chose to study it, to categorize it, to map its contours. That choice, to face fear with curiosity instead of resistance, became the foundation of her philosophy. At first, she didn't call it a healthy state of panic. She just knew that when she ignored fear, it grew louder. And when she listened, she uncovered truths she wouldn't have found otherwise. Fear was trying to protect her, sometimes clumsily, sometimes too aggressively, but always with a purpose. And so, as her story unfolds, she guides us into the many faces of fear. Each one of us knows these feelings in our own way. We've been rejected and felt small. We've worried about money late at night. We've stayed in relationships or jobs longer than we should, terrified of being alone. We've dreamed big, only to freeze when the chance to leap finally arrived. What Torabi teaches is not that fear disappears, but that we can engage with it, that we can ask, "What are you trying to tell me? What wisdom are you hiding behind your warning?" She shows us that fear can illuminate the path forward, but only if we stop treating it as the enemy and start treating it as an ally. And so our journey begins, with the sound of a heart beating faster, the pulse of fear quickening in our ears. Not a sign of weakness, but a signal that life is asking something of us. The question is, will we listen? Fear has a reputation problem. We treat it like an intruder, an enemy to be conquered or suppressed. But Farnoosh Torabi suggests a different view: fear as a messenger. Instead of imagining fear as a monster crouching in the corner, picture it as a stern teacher, one who doesn't sugarcoat, who startles you awake when you've grown too comfortable, who insists you pay attention to what matters most. Think about the last time you felt your pulse race, your stomach tighten, your palms sweat. Maybe it was before a presentation. Maybe it was when you checked your bank account and realized the numbers didn't add up. In that moment, the instinct is to push fear down, to distract yourself, to pretend it isn't there. But what if that sensation was your body's alarm system saying, "This moment counts. Don't miss it"? Torabi calls this a healthy state of panic. It isn't about spiraling into anxiety. It's about understanding that fear arises for a reason. Sometimes it signals danger, yes, but other times it's alerting us to possibility. The difference lies in how we respond. Fear says, "You're stepping onto new ground. You can run away, or you can lean in and ask, 'Why am I afraid? What am I protecting? What's at stake here?'" For her, this shift started in childhood. Growing up in a family that had left everything behind, money was scarce. Fear was everywhere. Fear of eviction, fear of not belonging, fear of failing to live up to her parents' sacrifices. At first, she mistook this fear for weakness. But over time she realized fear was telling her what she valued most: stability, security, belonging, love. And that realization changed everything. Instead of trying to erase fear, she began to decode it. Each fear carried a different message. Fear of rejection meant she craved connection. Fear of failure meant she cared deeply about the outcome. Fear of money meant she wanted safety and freedom. By listening closely, she discovered that fear wasn't a wall in her way. It was a guidepost pointing to where she should focus her energy. Imagine standing at a crossroads in your own life. One path is wide, paved, familiar. The other is narrow, dark, uncertain. Your chest tightens as you look at that smaller path. Your instinct is to retreat. But what if that tension isn't a stop sign but a compass needle, urging you toward growth? This reframing doesn't eliminate discomfort. The fear will still be there, humming like an alarm. But now, instead of drowning it out, you tune in. You ask what it wants you to know. And in that dialogue, you often find clarity. Not about what's safe, but about what matters most. For Farnoosh, fear became the lens through which she re-examined every area of her life: her career, her relationships, her finances, her dreams. Each type of fear carried its own lesson: rejection, loneliness, money, failure, exposure, even success. Each one revealed something she needed to confront, something that could help her grow stronger, braver, and more honest. The healthy state of panic is not about living in dread. It's about learning to let fear sharpen you, like a whetstone sharpening a blade. It's about turning fear into fuel, direction, and clarity. And so, as her story unfolds, we begin to see that the goal isn't to banish fear from our lives. The goal is to befriend it, to understand it, to let it teach us. Because on the other side of fear often lies the life we've been waiting to live: rejection. The word alone can feel like a punch to the chest. You know the sensation. Your stomach drops, your throat tightens, and a quiet voice inside whispers, "Maybe you're just not enough." Farnoosh Torabi knew that feeling all too well. As the daughter of immigrants, she grew up watching her parents fight for stability. Every dollar stretched, every opportunity pursued with urgency. That pressure carried into her own life. When she started applying for internships and jobs, she poured her heart into each resume, every interview. And then came the silence. The polite emails that said, "Thank you, but no." The doors that never opened. Each rejection felt like proof that she didn't belong. But over time, something shifted. She began to realize rejection wasn't a dead end. It was more like a detour sign on a road trip. You're heading straight, confident you know where you're going, and suddenly you're forced to turn. At first it's frustrating. You wanted the straight shot. But then you notice the new road winds through landscapes you never would have seen otherwise. Rejection, she discovered, can be redirection. There was one job in particular that she thought was the one. It was glamorous, competitive, the kind of opportunity that could launch her career into the stratosphere. She prepped for days, nailed the interview, and then waited. Days turned to weeks. Nothing. When the rejection finally landed, it stung deeply. But when she looked closer at her fear, she realized something. It wasn't telling her she was incapable. It was telling her she cared. She wanted her work to matter. She wanted her voice to be heard. That distinction was everything. Because once she understood the message, she could respond differently. Instead of shrinking, she sharpened. Instead of saying, "I guess I'm not good enough," she thought, "I need to find the place where I'm meant to contribute." That mindset turned rejection into a compass, pointing her toward better opportunities, ones that fit her values and her vision. Think about the last time you faced rejection. Maybe it was an application that didn't go anywhere. Maybe it was a relationship that ended before you were ready. It's tempting to treat rejection as a verdict on your value. But what if, like Farnoosh suggests, it's simply a signal? If the no hurt, that means the opportunity mattered to you. That pain is data. It shows you what you're willing to fight for. And here's the surprising part. Rejection can free you. Every closed door saves you from wasting years knocking where you don't belong. Every missed opportunity makes space for the right one to arrive. Rejection isn't a judgment. It's guidance. Farnoosh began to see her rejections as training. Each one toughened her, but it also taught her to listen more closely to her own desires. To ask, why does this matter to me? What is fear trying to show me here? And the answer was often clarity about who she was and where she needed to go. So when fear of rejection shows up in your life, don't silence it. Don't shove it down. Pause. Listen. Maybe it's not here to crush you. Maybe it's here to steer you toward the version of yourself you're still becoming. There's a quieter kind of fear that doesn't always announce itself with pounding heartbeats or shaky hands. It's the fear of missing out, the gnawing sense that while you sit still, life is passing you by, that someone else is climbing faster, doing more, achieving bigger. Farnoosh knew this fear intimately. As a driven professional, she found herself saying yes to almost everything. Every coffee meeting, every project, every speaking invitation. The logic seemed sound. What if she said no and missed the opportunity that could change her life? What if the one door she closed was the very one that led to everything she'd ever wanted? It's a trap many of us know well. You get invited to a networking dinner, even though you're exhausted. You sign up for another class, another committee, another side project, because what if that's the one that finally makes things click? On the surface, it looks like ambition. Underneath, it's fear disguised as hustle. Farnoosh began to see the cost of this constant yes. She was drained, overwhelmed, and stretched thin across commitments that didn't align with her deepest values. She would leave events late at night, asking herself, "Why am I here? What am I chasing?" That's when the lesson of fear revealed itself again. The fear of missing out wasn't warning her that she was lazy or falling behind. It was showing her that she craved meaning, that she wanted her time to matter. Saying yes to everything is like drinking from every glass at a crowded table, hoping one of them will quench your thirst. All you end up with is a bitter taste and a stomach ache. The truth she discovered is that the real fear behind FOMO is not missing out. It's wasting your life on the wrong things. So she began practicing the opposite muscle, the power of no. At first it felt terrifying, even selfish. Declining an invitation, stepping back from a project, passing on a shiny new opportunity, each choice triggered that familiar panic. But the more she listened to what her fear was really saying, the more she understood. Every no was a yes to something else. A yes to rest. A yes to meaningful work. A yes to being present with her family. You might feel this too. Maybe your calendar is packed with obligations that don't light you up. Maybe you scroll through feeds and feel a pang every time someone else shares a win. That's FOMO whispering that your life should look different. But the truth is, you don't need more. You need meaning. You need alignment. Farnoosh's healthy state of panic reframed FOMO as a guide, not a punishment. Instead of asking, "What will I miss if I say no?" she began to ask, "What will I gain by protecting my time?" That single shift gave her back hours, energy, and a sense of control over her own story. The fear of missing out, she realized, isn't about the event you skip or the opportunity you decline. It's about whether you trust yourself enough to believe you're already on the right path. And when you can trust that, the panic fades into something steadier. Confidence, money. Few things stir up as much hidden fear. For Farnoosh, growing up in an immigrant household meant money was never just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was dinner on the table, a roof that might or might not be there next month, the difference between belonging and being left out. She remembers standing in the grocery store with her mother, watching her carefully calculate every cent, always worried the total would be too high. Those moments left an imprint, the fear of not having enough burrowed deep into her bones. For many of us, money carries a similar weight. We tell ourselves stories. "I'll never make enough. If I don't keep hustling, I'll lose everything. If I take a risk, I'll go broke." These aren't just thoughts. They're fears dressed as financial wisdom. And yet, Farnoosh argues, fear of money doesn't mean we're doomed to struggle. It means we value stability. It means we care about security and freedom. And when we understand that, fear becomes a tool rather than a tyrant. She recalls her early years as a financial reporter. Surrounded by Wall Street veterans, she often felt like an outsider. She worried she didn't know enough, that she couldn't keep up. That fear, left unchecked, might have pushed her into playing it safe, keeping quiet, or pretending to understand instead of asking questions. But she chose differently. She leaned into the fear, using it as a reason to learn faster, study harder, and become an authority in her own right. Fear didn't silence her, it fueled her. Money fear can also whisper lies. It tells us that security comes only from more savings, more income, more hustle. But Torabi reminds us that true security isn't about endless accumulation. It's about clarity. Do you know what matters most to you? Do you understand what you're willing to spend on and what you can let go? Fear, she explains, forces us to confront these questions. When you're afraid of losing your job, you suddenly see what expenses are unnecessary. When you're anxious about debt, you learn the discipline of living within your means. The fear shines a harsh light on your financial habits, and if you're willing to look, it can guide you to healthier ones. Picture yourself standing at an ATM, checking your balance. The number staring back feels smaller than it should. That jolt in your stomach is fear. You could let it spiral into panic, into shame, into paralysis, or you could pause and ask, what is this fear showing me? Maybe it's telling you to build a safety net. Maybe it's reminding you to set boundaries around spending. Maybe it's nudging you to ask for the raise you've been avoiding. Farnoosh learned that money fear doesn't go away, even when your bank account grows. The stakes just shift. At one point in her career, she was earning more than she ever imagined. Yet the fear persisted. What if it all disappears? What if I can't keep this up? Instead of resenting the fear, she decided to treat it like a financial advisor living in her head. Sometimes the advisor exaggerated, yes, but sometimes it was pointing to real risks, reminding her to save, to diversify, to prepare for downturns. The lesson is simple but profound. Fear of money is not a curse. It's a signal. It's telling you that money matters, that you want to protect your well-being, that you're craving stability. By listening, by treating fear as data instead of a dictator, you can turn financial anxiety into financial wisdom. And when you begin to do that, something shifts. Money stops being a source of constant dread. It becomes a tool you can wield with clarity. Fear doesn't vanish, but instead of chaining you, it sharpens you. And in that sharpening, you start to see wealth not as a number, but as a way to build a life of freedom and security. There is another fear that hides in the quiet, one that slips in when the lights go out and the house falls silent. The fear of loneliness. For Farnoosh, it showed up in the spaces between relationships, in the pauses between phone calls, in the empty moments where no one else was around to tell her she mattered. Growing up in a household that had left its roots behind, she knew how isolation could creep into the corners of life. Her parents carried the ache of disconnection from their homeland, and she absorbed it like secondhand smoke. Loneliness has a particular sting. It doesn't shout like rejection or roar like failure. It whispers, "You are alone, and maybe you always will be." That whisper can push us into clinging, saying yes to friendships that drain us, jobs that diminish us, relationships that don't fit, just so we won't have to face the silence. For a long time, Farnoosh followed that pattern. She chased approval, saying yes to people and projects, filling her calendar so full there was no space to feel the emptiness. But the fear never went away. It lingered underneath the noise, a reminder that distraction is not the same as connection. Then slowly, she began to experiment with solitude. At first, it was uncomfortable. Sitting in a quiet apartment without the TV on felt unbearable. But when she stopped running from the silence, she discovered something unexpected. Loneliness had something to teach her. It wasn't just about the absence of others. It was about the absence of herself. The fear of being alone was actually pointing to a deeper need: self-acceptance, self-trust, the ability to enjoy her own company without needing someone else to validate her. Think about the last time you felt alone. Maybe you scrolled through your phone, desperate for a message, a like, a ping of attention. Did it help, or did it leave you emptier? Fear of loneliness isn't just about wanting people around you. It's about fearing that when you're left with only yourself, you won't like who you find. By reframing this fear, Farnoosh learned that solitude could be a sanctuary rather than a punishment. When she embraced it, she uncovered her own voice more clearly. She began to write not because someone asked her to, but because she wanted to. She began to savor quiet mornings, where her thoughts could unfold without interruption. She realized that the antidote to loneliness wasn't more noise, more commitments, or more company. It was learning to sit with herself and feel at home in her own skin. And here lies the paradox. When you become comfortable with solitude, you actually build deeper, healthier connections with others. Because you're no longer reaching out from a place of desperation. You're no longer asking people to fill a void. You're inviting them into a life that already feels whole. Fear of loneliness, then, isn't a curse. It's a signal that you need to come home to yourself. It's a reminder that connection begins inside, not outside. And when you honor that, you carry yourself differently. You stop clinging. You start choosing. You discover that being alone is not the same as being lonely. And sometimes, it's the quiet that finally helps you hear your own voice. Hear your own voice. Hear your own voice. Hear your own failure. The very word can freeze us in place. It carries the weight of humiliation, the sting of wasted effort, the fear that once we fall, we'll never get back up. For Farnoosh, failure was not an abstract concept. It was real, lived, and raw. She remembers moments when projects collapsed, when pitches fell flat, when her best efforts seemed invisible. Each time, the temptation was the same. Hide, retreat, play it safe next time. But then came the question, what if failure isn't the end? What if it's just feedback? She learned this the hard way in her career. Early on, she pitched a big story she believed could make waves. She worked tirelessly, polished every angle, and delivered with conviction. And still, the editors passed. She felt crushed, embarrassed, convinced she had overestimated herself. But looking back, she saw what her fear was really telling her. She cared deeply about her work, enough that the setback pierced her. And that pain meant she was on the right path. Failure hurts because it matters. If you didn't care, you wouldn't feel the sting. That's the hidden message fear carries. It's not here to bury you. It's here to ask, will you try again? Will you learn? Think of a child learning to ride a bike. They wobble, they fall, they scrape their knee. If they gave up at the first fall, they'd never ride. But each failure teaches balance. Each bruise teaches resilience. Adults forget this. We treat failure as permanent, forgetting it's often just part of the process. Farnoosh reframed failure as rehearsal. Each mistake became practice for the bigger stage. When her stories were ignored, she refined her voice. When her pitches failed, she learned to craft sharper ones. Failure wasn't proof she didn't belong. It was proof she was stretching beyond her comfort zone. There's another layer here too. Failure exposes our ego. We want to be perfect, admired, untouchable. But failure strips that away, leaving us face to face with our humanity. That exposure can feel unbearable, but it's also liberating. Because once you failed publicly and survived, you stop fearing it so much. You realize you're still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. In her book, Torabi urges us to view failure as a teacher in disguise. It doesn't hand out gold stars. It hands out scars, lessons etched into our skin. But those scars remind us that we dared, that we risked, that we reached. She also reminds us that the greatest failure is not trying at all. Playing it safe may shield you from embarrassment, but it also shields you from growth. Fear of failure is really fear of becoming visible, of daring to want more. And when you let that fear dictate your choices, you shrink your life to fit inside a safe, suffocating box. Farnoosh chose differently. She let failure sting, but she also let it instruct. Over time, she saw that her so-called failures were often detours leading to better opportunities. A rejected story freed her to write one that mattered more. A lost job pushed her toward entrepreneurship. Each stumble carried seeds of redirection. So when failure knocks you down, Don't confuse it for the end of the road. It may be the doorway to your next chapter. Fear of failure, once understood, is simply proof that you're playing a game worth caring about. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is fall, stand up, and keep pedaling. Uncertainty is the fear that hums in the background of every big decision. It's the unknown, the unlit hallway, the leap without a visible landing. Farnoosh remembers standing on the edge of major life choices, leaving behind a steady paycheck, taking a chance on her own voice, and feeling the ground fall away beneath her feet. Uncertainty made her restless, because she had grown up craving control. For someone who had seen her family lose nearly everything when they left their home country, not knowing what tomorrow would bring felt unbearable. But here's the truth she came to embrace. Life is nothing but uncertainty. Every morning we wake up, we step into a day we cannot predict. And fear of uncertainty, she realized, is really the fear of losing control. We long for guarantees, for certainty, for a map that tells us where every turn will lead. Yet maps only show us what others have already walked. The path meant for us is often uncharted. At one point, Farnoosh had the option to follow the safe, predictable route. Stay in her stable job, follow the expected milestones, silence the urge to try something different. That choice promised security. But her fear of uncertainty, her anxiety about not knowing if she'd succeed, was really an invitation to grow. She asked herself, what if the unknown isn't a void, but a possibility? Picture yourself standing at a cliff's edge. You can stay where you are, safe but stuck, or you can leap. Your stomach twists. Fear tells you, what if you fall? But what if that same fear is also saying, this leap matters? Pay attention. You're about to become someone new. When she finally stepped into uncertainty, launching her own projects, speaking her truth, building her own platforms, she discovered a paradox. The very thing she feared gave her freedom. The lack of guarantees forced her to create her own path, to trust herself more deeply than she ever had. She found strength not by erasing the fear of uncertainty, but by walking with it. The lesson is sharp and simple. Certainty is an illusion. The only constant in life is change. And fear of uncertainty isn't a sign you should retreat. It's a signal that you're moving into territory where real growth happens. Farnoosh's story shows that fear will always be there when you step into the unknown. But that doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. In fact, it often means you're exactly where you're supposed to be, at the threshold of transformation. So the next time uncertainty rattles your bones, remember, you don't need a map. You need trust. Trust in your resilience. Trust that fear is not a warning to turn back, but a companion urging you forward. The road ahead may not be lit, but that doesn't mean it's not yours to walk. Loss is the fear we rarely name until it's already upon us. It's the quiet dread that one day the people we love will be gone, that the work we've poured ourselves into will crumble, that the life we've built can vanish in a blink. For Farnoosh, this fear wasn't theoretical. She lived through it when family members passed away, when relationships ended, when chapters of her life closed before she felt ready. Each loss carved a hollow space inside her, a reminder that nothing stays the same forever. At first she resisted this truth. Like many of us, she wanted permanence, something solid to cling to. She wanted to believe that if she worked hard enough, loved fiercely enough, saved wisely enough, she could lock life into place. But fear of loss kept whispering, you can't hold on to everything. Change is coming whether you like it or not. That whisper hurt. It still does. Yet hidden in that pain was a lesson about presence. Loss clarifies. It strips away the illusion of endless time. When you know a moment won't last forever, you begin to treasure it differently. A dinner with family becomes sacred. A conversation with a friend feels weightier. The fear of loss, instead of crushing her, began to sharpen her sense of gratitude. It reminded her to savor the here and now, not some imagined tomorrow. Think about the last time you said goodbye to someone, maybe just at an airport, maybe something more permanent. That ache you felt in your chest, that awareness of absence, is the same signal Farnoosh describes. It's fear calling you to wake up, to stop scrolling while your child is talking to you, to notice the way sunlight spills across your kitchen table, to cherish the laugh of someone you love, because one day, you'll wish for just one more. Farnoosh began practicing a new habit, naming her losses, even the small ones, and honoring them. A project that ended sooner than she expected, a friendship that drifted apart, the realization that time was pulling her parents into old age. Instead of pretending these didn't matter, she let herself grieve. And in that grief, she found a deeper appreciation for the life still unfolding in front of her. Loss, she explains, teaches us urgency. Not the frantic, hustling kind of urgency that fear of missing out demands, but a softer urgency. A reminder that life is fragile, that love is finite, that time is the most precious currency we have. When fear of loss shows up, it's tempting to numb it, to push it aside, to act as though everything will stay the same forever. But if you listen, fear whispers something else. Be here now. Love them while you can. Live fully while you're able. For Farnoosh, this lesson reshaped her priorities. Success wasn't just about money or status anymore. It was about presence, about showing up for the people who mattered most, about savoring the fleeting beauty of an ordinary afternoon. The fear of loss didn't vanish, but it transformed into fuel for gratitude. And that gratitude, she realized, is what makes life rich. Not the things you stockpile, not the titles on your resume, but the fleeting, fragile, luminous moments that fear of loss reminds you not to waste. Exposure. The fear of being seen for who you really are. Not the polished version, not the resume bullet points, not the smiling face you post online. The real you. The messy, uncertain, imperfect you. For Farnoosh, this fear surfaced when her work began reaching larger audiences. At first, the idea of being recognized felt exhilarating. But then came the questions. What if they don't like me? What if they find out I'm not as smart as I pretend to be? What if they see through me? That fear is familiar to anyone who has ever hit send on an email, stepped onto a stage, or spoken up in a meeting. It's the voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" It's the suspicion that if others saw the unfiltered version of you, they would turn away. And so we polish, we perform, we hide behind masks. Farnoosh remembers a turning point early in her media career. She was invited to share her financial advice on television. The night before, she stayed awake rehearsing every line, terrified she'd stumble, terrified she'd embarrass herself. On camera, her smile felt forced, her answers too careful, her energy flat. Afterwards, a mentor told her something she never forgot. You're so focused on being perfect that no one gets to see you. It hit her like a slap. Fear of exposure had tricked her into believing she needed to present a flawless version of herself. But perfection is sterile. It leaves no room for connection. People don't bond with masks. They bond with humanity, with quirks, with stumbles, with the tiny cracks that reveal who we really are. Think of a time you hesitated to share an idea in a group because you thought it might sound foolish, or a moment you hid your real feelings because you didn't want to be judged. That's the fear of exposure at work. It tells you to stay hidden, to keep your guard up, to never risk revealing too much. But here's the irony. What we fear exposing is often exactly what makes us relatable. When Farnoosh began loosening her grip on perfection, something changed. She allowed herself to laugh at her mistakes on air. She shared her insecurities openly with her audience. Instead of diminishing her credibility, it made people trust her more. Vulnerability became a bridge. It turned strangers into allies, colleagues into collaborators, audiences, into communities. Exposure is scary because it makes us feel fragile. But Farnoosh reframes it. Fear of exposure is a signal that you are on the edge of true connection. When you reveal who you are, you risk judgment, yes, but you also open the door to being seen, accepted, even loved, for your authentic self. Imagine standing in front of a room, heart pounding, voice trembling. Fear tells you to stay quiet, to retreat into safety. But if you push through, if you speak, you may find that people lean closer. They don't run. They recognize themselves in you. And that recognition is what builds trust. In her own life, Farnoosh discovered that the more she showed her real self, the more her career blossomed. Opportunities came not because she perfected her image, but because she embraced her truth. Fear of exposure didn't vanish. It still whispered in her ear. But she learned to translate it. This matters. You're showing something real. Stay with it. Exposure is not the enemy. It is the doorway to authenticity. And when you step through, you may discover that the very things you wanted to hide are the things that connect you most deeply to others. Success. We spend so much of our lives chasing it. Yet when it finally comes into view, another fear rises quietly in its shadow. What if I can't handle it? What if I don't deserve it? What if success costs me the very things I love most? For Farnoosh, this fear didn't hit until later in her career. She had achieved many of the goals she once only dreamed about: television appearances, book deals, financial security. And yet, instead of pure joy, she felt an edge of dread. Success brought new expectations. Bigger stages meant bigger audiences, but also bigger chances of stumbling. More income meant more responsibility, more decisions, more pressure to keep growing. And then there was the quiet guilt. If she soared too high, would she leave her family behind? Would friends envy her instead of embrace her? Success was supposed to be the prize. Instead, it carried a heaviness she hadn't anticipated. This is a fear many people don't admit to. It feels ungrateful to worry about success when so many are struggling to find it. But Farnoosh insists that the fear of success is just as real as the fear of failure. At its heart, it's about identity. Success forces you to ask, who am I becoming? Can I live with this version of myself? She recalls moments when she stood backstage, microphone in hand, moments before a keynote speech. The fear wasn't that she would fail, but that she would succeed, that she would live up to the role, and then be trapped by it forever. Success can become a cage, she realized, if you let it define you. The fear was whispering, don't lose yourself in the applause. Don't trade authenticity for achievement. Think of your own victories: landing the promotion, buying the house, reaching the milestone you'd been aiming at for years. How long did the joy last before it was replaced by pressure, expectation, or the quiet question, what now? Fear of success shows up not because we're unworthy, but because success has the power to shift our identity. It can distance us from the people we love, or from the person we once were. Farnoosh's healthy state of panic invited her to reframe this fear too. Instead of seeing success as a trap, she began to see it as a chance to clarify her values. Did this achievement align with who she wanted to be? Was she building a life she loved, or just stacking accomplishments that looked good on paper? Success, she realized, is only meaningful when it supports your deeper purpose. She learned to ask herself, if I keep climbing, what am I climbing toward? And will I still recognize myself when I get there? Those questions turned fear of success from a paralyzing anxiety into a compass. The fear wasn't telling her to shrink back. It was reminding her to stay rooted, to stay true, to measure success not by applause but by alignment. There's a quiet courage in choosing not just to succeed, but to succeed on your own terms, to say yes to growth while refusing to sacrifice your values, to let fear remind you that success is not the finish line, It's just another leg of the journey. And so, Farnoosh embraced her fear of success as a guide. Not a signal to stop, but a reminder to ask, am I building a life that feels like mine? Or am I just performing for approval? By listening closely, she found her way back to authenticity, even in the midst of achievement. Fear never truly leaves. That's the final truth Farnoosh Torabi wants us to carry. We spend years wishing it would disappear, treating it like an enemy we must destroy. But what if fear is not a curse to eradicate, but a companion we're meant to walk alongside? What if the goal is not fearlessness, but partnership? By the time she had confronted rejection, money, loneliness, failure, uncertainty, exposure, and even success, Farnoosh no longer saw fear as a force working against her. She saw it as a voice, sometimes harsh, sometimes subtle, that was always trying to protect her. Yes, it was often misguided, often exaggerated. But it was also honest. It revealed her deepest values. It drew her attention to the places where she stood to grow, to love, to risk, to live more fully. Picture fear as a traveling companion seated beside you on a long journey. You don't hand it the wheel. You don't let it dictate where you go. But you also don't shove it out of the car. You let it ride along, acknowledging its warnings, listening for its signals, deciding for yourself when to take them seriously and when to keep driving. Living in a healthy state of panic means accepting that fear will show up when you're on the cusp of something meaningful. It means learning to distinguish between the fear that's trying to keep you safe and the fear that's pointing you toward growth. It means using fear as a compass rather than a cage. Farnoosh came to see that every fear carried a hidden invitation. Fear of rejection asked her to find her true community. Fear of money taught her discipline and clarity. Fear of loneliness revealed the importance of self-trust. Fear of failure pushed her to stretch. Fear of uncertainty reminded her that life itself is unpredictable and that trust matters more than control. Fear of exposure nudged her toward authenticity. Fear of success showed her how to grow without losing herself. When you look at fear this way, it changes everything. Suddenly, that racing heart before a big decision doesn't mean stop. It means pay attention. That knot in your stomach isn't just anxiety. It's a signpost pointing towards something you value. And that tightness in your chest, the one that tells you might lose something or someone, it's a reminder to cherish the moment you have right now. This is the journey Farnoosh invites us to take. To stop running from fear, to stop silencing it, to step into a new kind of relationship with it. Not adversarial, not paralyzed, but curious, open, willing to learn. Because in the end, fear is not just the shadow we dread. It is also the guide that keeps us awake to our lives. It is the quiet teacher reminding us that time is short, that meaning is precious, that our lives are worth showing up for. So the next time fear tightens its grip on you, whether it's about money, love, work, or the unknown, pause. Don't push it away. Don't silence it. Ask it what it's trying to show you. And then, step forward with it at your side. That, she says, is how you build real wealth. That is how you create a career that feels alive. That is how you win. Not by silencing fear, but by learning to dance with it. So tonight, as you close your eyes and let these ideas settle, remember, fear will be there tomorrow, just as it was yesterday. But it doesn't have to be the enemy. It can be your compass, your teacher, your constant reminder to live fully. Dim the lights, breathe deeply, and let fear rest beside you, not as a threat, but as a guide, while you drift into sleep, carrying the quiet power of a healthy state of panic. Healthy state of panic. Healthy state of panic. Healthy